Hey everyone, it's Karen, and today I wanted to review Being Human, which is written by Judy Heumann, and then Kristen Joyner helped her, or whatever. This book was amazing. I first heard about it because a professor that I am friends with, she posted about it on Facebook like way before it came out, and I pre-ordered it, and I don't even think it had a release date when I pre-ordered it, which was very unusual because it always says pre-order, it will be out whatever time, and it did not, so that was interesting. So Judy Heumann, if you don't know who she is a freaking badass. She is like the coolest woman ever, and I am really hoping that this book is turned into like a graphic novel and maybe a board book. I mean, it is so amazing. So basically Judy Heumann, she was born in 1947, I believe, and after a little bit, I think she was 2 or so, she ended up getting polio, and so for the rest of her life, she she calls herself a quadriplegic. She has some use of her hands, but basically she's confined to a wheelchair, although I don't really think that it's the right thing to say she's confined to a wheelchair because she is not confined by anything. This woman is amazing. So the book starts by going over some of the history on just disabilities and the way that people viewed them back in the day. And this is familiar to me from just my special education classes. She talks about how parents were often blamed for their kid having a disability, that they must have done something wrong. I know that she didn't mention this directly, but autism, for example, used to be called the refrigerator mom syndrome because many kids with autism have like sensory issues, and so their moms may have not hugged or held them as much because their child didn't like it, and then people blamed the mom, saying that it's all their fault that their kid has autism. She also just kind of talks about the value of a human life, a human with a disability, because she talks about Hitler and how the whole like him killing Jews and gay people and like all the people that he like exterminated in the concentration camps and the death camps and all that it was actually started by he started his experimenting on people with disability. That was kind of like his pilot project, was working with those, killing those with disabilities. He started by the two main ways is that he would gather them together and he would either starve them or kill them through lethal injection. And then as that program went on, he ended up resorting to gassing too. And that's where he kind of tested all the strategies and techniques that would be used other places later on during World War II and things, because yeah, he tested it on them. Basically, he felt that people with disabilities were a burden to society, and he also didn't want their genes like out and about. So also at the beginning of the book, Judy talks about her childhood and just what it was like to be her growing up. It starts when she is 6 years old, and she talks just about how social she was and how much she wanted to play with the neighborhood kids. And so she would wheel herself over to their houses. Luckily, she had 2 friends that lived on the same side of the street as her, and she would wheel herself, but again, she didn't have very good use of her hands and there were no electric wheelchairs, so it's hard to begin with for her to wheel herself. And then she said that there was a tiny little incline in the sidewalk that someone walking would probably never even notice, but because she struggled wheeling herself around in her wheelchair, she definitely noticed. And she talks about like getting to the top, and then I forgot what happened. She sneezed or something and she lost control of her wheelchair, and she just went back down to the bottom and had to start all that work again. She also talks about how curbs to her were like the Great Wall of China, and so that is why she could only hang out with friends that were on the same side of the street as her, unless they would help her to the other side of the street. But anyway, she would get to their house and then there was no way to like go up to the door and knock, so she would just yell like, "Kid Mary, come out and play," or whatever her friends' names were. And you know, sometimes she wouldn't be heard, so you just have to keep yelling, and then someone would come to the door and say like, so-and-so is gonna come out in a few minutes to play, or they can't play today. So it's kind of like a little embarrassing for her. She had to shout just loud enough for the people inside the house to hear that she wanted to play, but not loud enough for the whole street to hear her. So she has a lot of friends in her neighborhood, and then it kind of gets to the time period when you would normally start school, and all her friends go off to school and she can't. And I don't know, I guess she really feels isolated and just like, I don't know, it's weird that she doesn't go to school, and then she has a younger brother, and when he starts school, that makes it even worse because she is not able to go to school. Her mom was a fierce advocate for her, and that's probably where she learned a lot of her like badass advocating skills. So her mom was a fierce advocate for her and tried to get her into the public school near her house. And I believe it was that school that basically said she could not come because she was a fire hazard. And then they tried to go to a Jewish school, and the Jewish school said, well, I bet your Hebrew isn't good enough. So Judy, who's very intelligent, spent so much time working on her Hebrew and basically had like amazing Hebrew skills, and then tried again to get in. And I forgot what their excuse was, but basically like the whole Hebrew thing was just an excuse anyway to not let her in. And so when she did all that work, then they didn't expect that she would work so hard, and yeah, they just denied her when she came back after all that. When she is in 4th grade, like actually the middle of 4th grade, she finally gets into a school. She has to be bused there. It's pretty far away. It's the only school that has like basically an accessible way for her to get in the building, and she's in a special education classroom with kids who are ages 9 to 21, all in the same classroom, and they all have different disabilities. So for example, Judy has polio, but her mind is completely like, she has good cognition. I don't know what her intelligence is, probably average. I mean, and then she's with other students that are much more severe than her or have other needs, and they're all just like lumped together in the basement. Things really started to change for Judy as well when she went to camp. So she went to this camp, which is for kids with disabilities. I think it was probably one of the first ones ever, if not the first. And it was just a place of freedom for her because she was allowed to be who she was. She was allowed to have freedom that she didn't have other places. A lot of people with disabilities are kind of sheltered by their parents and just like almost limited by them in some ways, even though their parents are fierce advocates for them often. They just don't realize that their kids are capable of so much more. And there's also this idea of privacy that you might not have if you have a disability. Like people are always helping you or trying to just be with you all the time, and you might just want to like hang out by yourself. But anyway, this Crip Camp, which is a documentary on Netflix, kind of talks about Judy's experience at camp and just the camp in general. It's not just about her, but it just talks about how these people like bonded together, and it was the first time they felt like they were with their people. So the rest of the book goes into just where she progressed from there and how she became a fierce advocate. I keep saying fierce advocate, but like seriously, she's such a badass. Such a strong advocate for everyone with disabilities and just for everyone getting access to things that could make their lives more independent and give them access to things. So there's all these different examples in the book of different things that she has done in the past just to advocate for people, and she continues to this day. But one of them obviously is like universal design, and just the idea that all people should have access to buildings, and so that's why there's reserved parking for people with disabilities. There's like the curb cutouts so that someone can wheel their way into the building, and like outside of a building, those buttons you can press for the doors to open for you, elevators, just things like that, so someone can access a public building and that they aren't excluded from entry just because of their disability. And again, you can't be a fire hazard if all those things are in place. And that was one of the reasons as a kid that she was denied access to school. She even goes into special education concepts and just like the access that kids need to have to the general education curriculum. Like, for example, Judy was kind of held back a little bit just because the rest of her class was not at her academic level and the work was very, very easy for her. So everyone has dignity, whether they have a disability or not, and Judy really talks about that idea in her book. She talks about, for example, in her special education class when she was a kid, how she would help other students eat, and it was interesting for her to really understand through that process because she was able to feed herself. But she really talked about, like, how does someone want to eat? Like, what do they want first? Do they want their milk first? Do they want their sandwich? Do they eat all of one food before they eat another food? Or do they like a bite of their sandwich, a bite of their fruit, and, you know, all of that? What's their pace? And that's not really things that you have control over when someone else is feeding you. So just that idea of dignity and just being really present with the person that has a disability. Other things that she talked about kind of that go within that theme of dignity are just the idea of privacy, that someone with a disability is often like just someone's always with them, like almost smothering them, when they can be independent if the environment is set up in a way for them to be independent. And just like anyone else, they want privacy sometimes. They want to be alone reading like I do sometimes or whatever. And that lack of privacy is something they experience a lot. Another idea that was talked about was romance, and how sometimes people think that a person with a disability will never find romance and love, and that's just not true at all. They are a person and they deserve to be loved by somebody. The other major theme that I saw was access, which includes physical access into buildings, but just access to be part of a community as well. And she even goes into special education, talking about how students are excluded and put into special education classrooms when really they benefit the most from being included in a general education classroom. Or, I mean, at least look at each person as an individual and figure out what plan works best from them. But there's a lot of research supporting co-teaching and including students with special needs into a general education classroom. Separate is not equal. And that brings me to another point, just this idea of the civil rights movement that, you know, was trying to get equal opportunities for people of color. And that really helped like set the tone and set, like, basically they did all the work to allow all this disability activism to happen, because they laid the foundation. And they even supported Judy a lot. There was one point where they were blocking this building for, I want to say 7 days or something, to get Section 504 passed. And yeah, the Black Panthers, like, I think they brought them food, or all these different groups, mainly Black groups, would like support them. Like, what do you need? What do you need right now? Like, they were talking about they're dirty because they've been there for like 7 days. Someone came in and washed their hair. Like I said, I think the Black Panthers gave them food. They gave them like a breakfast and lunch for the next day, and then they had a hot dinner. So basically they had a hot dinner and then some like snacks to go for later, just to keep them going. Yeah, so it was really cool to see how interconnected the disability group was with Black activists, and how important the civil rights movement was to the history of not only helping Black people, but helping everybody. And I think that's a really important idea to just remember at this time when we say Black Lives Matter. And I'm not even gonna get into that in detail, but when one group is helped, really it branches out and our whole community is better. And that was really evident in this book. So I would recommend this book to every single person I know. I thought it was amazing. This is one suggestion I have though. There is an amazing interview that Judy did with Trevor Noah. Trevor Noah is amazing. Judy is amazing. It was a great interview. It's only about 10 minutes long. So my suggestion would be to start there, see if you're interested in this a little bit more. And then my second suggestion would be to read this book. And when you're done with this book, why don't you top it off by watching Crip Camp, which is on Netflix. I hope you guys are doing well. I hope you have an amazing start to your week, and I will see you soon. Bye, guys.